Hello everyone, my name is Syahidah Rahman. I'm from History Department of Universitas Indonesia. Today I'd like to present my paper about public history as an effort to increase historical consciousness in Indonesia during pandemic period.
My presentation will be divided into 4 sections, which are the introduction, research problem, analysis and conclusion. First of all, as the introduction, I will explain a bit about what historical consciousness is. John Lukács explained that historical consciousness emphasized on memory, knowledge, and related to historical events. Next, based on Pasca, historical consciousness is not just merely remembered past but also how does it interpret the historical events in order to feel the usefulness. Some Indonesian historian also explains about historical consciousness, for example, A.B. Lapian, who explained that historical consciousness is the purification of history, the study of the elementary things about what, who, when, where, and why, the image of history and its function in education. Kunto Wijoyo also said that historical consciousness is an effort to understand that someone is a part of the past, shaped by the past and being completed by the present time. These past months we've been facing a pandemic called COVID-19 pandemi. This COVID-19 pandemi will be one of a historical event remembered by the public in the future. This pandemic itself giving the public different influence and side effect for each person. As one of the historical events, the COVID-19 will be going through the historiography process, which is a process of writing history based on the sources collected by the writers after going through critics. Different sources will lead to a different point of view of a historical event, which means more sources from a different point of view will give a better result of historiography. Based on my short explanation before, the research question I have for my paper is how public history raised the historical consciousness during the pandemic period in Indonesia. As for my analysis, I will divide it into 3 parts. First is a short definition about public history, second is public history and historical consciousness, and the last one is the example at how we use public history. So, in simple definition, public history is a history as it is experienced by and interpreted for the public. By doing public history means giving a chance for public to tell history from their perspective. Historical consciousness relates to thinking of ourselves in time as historical beings and being aware of belonging to a specific group with a particular history and identity. Historical consciousness closely tied to the temporal dimension, which meets our need to know and understand our origins as a way to build our identity. A famous philosophy historian once said, "Everyone can be a historian for themselves. People can seek and write about their own perspective of history, which will contribute to shaping and interpreting any historical event around them." Here's some example of how public history is being used. In most Western countries, there are lots of websites created to collect stories about a certain event. For example, this is a website related to hurricane where people who experience it sharing their experience. In the middle part of the picture is shown some part of people's story. Another example is on the one related to the story during the pandemic period. In this site, everyone from every part of the world can share their experience during this pandemic period. For example, here is a story about someone's father who needs to go on through a COVID-19 test before going a surgical procedure which is usually not needed. Another one is also telling how the social distancing around them and how the supermarket running out of eggs. Another story from a prisoner who's feeling guilty for being released during this pandemic period, remembering prison being the biggest COVID cluster. In Indonesia, there are also people who shared their experience on how they do self-quarantine or surviving COVID-19 on various platforms like Facebook and others. I'm taking an example on this one story shared on a group about how he survived and how's his daily activity on the hospital. His story triggers people to share their own experience during the pandemic, especially those who share a same group with him. Those stories shared by the public during the pandemic time will be part of historical sources used to write the historical event happened during the pandemic era. Public history can be used to fill the empty gaps on the historiography of any historical event, which can only be found by having the public's perspective on that event. History itself is a process of making sense of the past, where the past is interpreted for the sake of understanding the present and anticipating the future. As the conclusion, seeing how one person's experience can make others around them sharing their own perspective on certain event, public history can be counted as an effort to raise historical consciousness, especially during this pandemic period, by asking people contribution on how they experience the pandemic. By having the public perspective on their experience at a certain event, not only contributing to the future historiography but also as a lesson for the future. And that brings us to the end. I'd like to thank you for your time and attention today. Have a nice day. Thank you.